Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special bonus episode of the Best Phone Plans Podcast. Joining us today, we have Sascha Segan from PC Mag. He has been out doing all kinds of testing of the latest wireless technologies, and we are super excited to dive into them today. Sascha, welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. And it's been a heck of a week, so I'm glad to get to the end of it. But it's been a really interesting week, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I think we had C-band launch on January 19th, which was super exciting. We had this whole FAA debacle, which maybe we'll save for another time. But I'm really excited to dive into C-band. I don't have it here in Colorado. I know you have it in New York. You did incredible testing with this brand new Win software. I think we just got to start from the top here. First, for the audience, what is C-band? Like, how would you describe C-band to your readers?
So C-band is the sweet spot in terms of 5G frequencies. That 5G can operate on any frequency. There's low-band 5G, there's high-band 5G, but it works best when you can have a combination of wide channels for those fast speeds and a frequency low enough that it can go some distance, that it doesn't just go 800 feet and peter out. And in general, we found that the 3 to 7 gigahertz range seems to be that sweet spot in terms of 5G, where you can get the channels wide enough, but you also don't have to put a panel every 800 feet. And C-band at 3.7 to 4 gigahertz is right in that sweet spot.
It's perfect. So it's this sweet spot, this Goldilocks spectrum, as it's been called. I feel like there's been slightly different takes in the industry. T-Mobile really touting their 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, whereas Verizon, AT&T trying to hype up their C-band spectrum. It went live, and you went out and you were testing it. Sascha, what were the questions you were seeking to answer when you departed from your abode in New York City and hit the streets to connect to this C-band network?
So the first question was, what is the range of C-band? Because that's going to control how many people get it and how far you can be from one of these panels, how many of these panels have to be laid out. And the range thing, of course, is basically what killed millimeter wave. Millimeter wave, high-band 5G had great promise through 2018 and 2019, but it became clear that the range was so short on that technology, it's basically impossible to cover cities with it. So range was number one. Number two, sort of related to range, was about these airport exclusion zones. Because of this whole FAA debate, the carriers agreed to not install C-band a certain distance from major airports. So I want to know, how big is the exclusion zone? How close can I get to the airport and still have C-band? Especially for some of these really in-city airports like Chicago Midway, Dallas Love Field, San Diego, New York LaGuardia, all of which really back up onto dense neighborhoods that might want the service.
Yeah, Dennis and I were talking about this. It's almost like a huge conflict where airports are in densely populated cities is they're the places that would benefit the most from C-band. So it really is a bummer that it's turned off for now, but it's interesting that you were able to go and kind of figure out where the line is for that.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. So we've got the range, we've got the exclusion zones. I wanted to see if later the question was, I wanted to see if the maps were telling the truth, which is of course
that's always a hot topic, I think, with carriers.
And then finally, performance. I mean, the thing is about week one performance on any network is that it's not really realistic. It's either going to be lousy because it's still in an experimental engineering mode, or it's going to be unrealistically terrific because there's nobody on it and it's totally unloaded. So I was really much more interested in these range and coverage issues than in the performance issue, which is going to sort out over the next couple of months as people like put phones on this network.
Yeah.
So Sascha, real quick on that note, what's your takeaway as far as the actual range of C-band goes? Do you think it's pretty comparable to N41? Are you noticing that it's actually doing a little bit better? What's your end-all be-all walkway from it so far?
I think it's pretty comparable to N41 at the power levels that they're allowing. So the best C-band range result we got so far was in Chicago with AT&T, and we got about 1.5 miles.
Wait, just back up a sec. You connected to AT&T C-band?
Hey, we do it
Sascha,
all.
that exists? What? Yeah,
Barely.
Can you explain what's going on here and why I'm so surprised? So Verizon and AT&T got C-band, but what did their deployments look like?
So Verizon is really trying to catch up with T-Mobile right now in terms of having good citywide 5G performance. So they are building C-band fast. They're covering entire metro areas, big cities, small cities. They are really putting as much of this out there as they can. They say they cover 95 million people right now, right?
Yeah, I've heard similar numbers.
Okay. AT&T says it only has a limited amount of C-band in 8 cities. It will not give maps. It will not give an amount covered. And this is all part of a larger AT&T strategy because certain equipment that they really want for the future isn't going to be available until this summer. So because the equipment that's going to be compatible with AT&T's future plans is coming available in 6 months, they don't want to have to set up a whole bunch of panels that'll be obsolete in 6 months.
That makes sense. So
What are your thoughts based off the two different strategies that we're kind of seeing happen here? So like AT&T is basically staying tried and true with their one-touch policy. Verizon seems to be going pedal to the metal just to get as much C-band out there as possible. What are your thoughts on the different approaches? And if you can give like a little bit of a prediction, which one do you think is going to end up panning out better for the long term as far as 5G goes?
I mean, in this case, Verizon is a one-touch policy too. The reason that AT&T is doing what they're doing is because of another frequency called, which unfortunately doesn't have a name. Everybody's just started calling it 3.45. And
was this the Andromeda auction that Mike Dano's been talking about?
Yeah.
So Mike invented that term, and he's been trying to push it. He's been trying to do that Weather Channel thing where they like invent their own names for storms.
I love it. Maybe we can just call it the Andromeda spectrum then.
Okay, so credit to Mike. So AT&T bought a lot of Andromeda, and the important point is this summer AT&T says the panels are available that can simultaneously transmit Andromeda and C-band. Verizon did not participate in the Andromeda auction. They went all in on C-band. They don't need to worry about that. They don't need Andromeda panels at all. So Verizon is not going to go up the pole and then go up the pole again in a year. They just don't have to worry about that because they don't have that later Andromeda spectrum to concern themselves with.
Interesting. How do you think, so it sounds like both are doing one touch. Verizon basically has a lead now because of equipment availability. They can deploy C-band, they're good to go. AT&T's waiting. It's a smarter move for them. They'll, in the end, get more spectrum available by combining C-band with Andromeda. What do you expect the performance to be? Do you think AT&T will be able to deliver like better speeds by combining these frequencies together? Or do you think Verizon's all set and will be able to deliver an adequate experience with just C-band?
I think in the 2022-23 timeframe, you are going to see these as being pretty competitive with each other. And I think we're going to see them both in the probably 300 megabit range. Then in 2024, things shift again because a second batch of C-band becomes available. And Verizon bought more of that than AT&T.
Ah. Will that batch just work on the existing panels?
Yeah.
That was it. That was the move.
Sascha, focusing a little bit deeper on the nitty-gritty of network deployment and strategy, do you think that it's more critical to have very deep channels like what Verizon did by going all in with C-band? Or do you think AT&T has a somewhat slight advantageous position due to the fact they have such a wide portfolio of different spectrums that they can carrier aggregate?
I prefer to have a smaller number of broader channels. And that is because carrier aggregation has a certain cost. Carrier aggregation has a certain cost in data efficiency. So To make a long story short, if you have two 40 megahertz channels here and here, they are not quite as fast or as efficient as one single 80 megahertz channel. They're almost as good, but not quite. And of course, there right now, T-Mobile is in the sweet spot because they have their 80 to 100 megahertz of 2.5 pretty much everywhere. And as we saw, they're starting to add their 10 megahertz of low band. And then in some places, they're doubling the 2.5. And they're just beginning to experiment with doing 160, 2 times 80. And there the situation becomes they're limited by the backhaul on their towers, which is a significant problem for T-Mobile.
Yeah, I think we've touched on that being a problem. Thankfully, it can hopefully be fixed with money and by spending money to just upgrade the backhaul. But yeah, it's exciting to see that. Where did you first connect to or see T-Mobile doing the 5G carrier aggregation? I feel like they've been equally as elusive as AT&T is with their 5G map with where they're actually deploying it.
T-Mobile does not have a map for aggregation. And I just stumbled on some N41, N71 mid-band, low-band aggregation when I was doing my Verizon tests in Brooklyn. And looking more closely at what was happening on the T-Mobile tower, it was obvious this was just an engineering experiment. Like there was not much data going over the N71 channel at all. They were just doing it to see, and carriers do this, we have this really dense layout here in New York. We need to figure out how standalone with carrier aggregation works in a really dense cell layout before we go wide. So they're clearly playing with it, but it's there.
Not to get too sidetracked, but I want to just touch on this real quick. I have had the experience to also test N41 carrier aggregated with N71 on standalone. And my experience, and you tell me if this lines up with yours, but my experience was that the performance was slightly worse than NSA. Like the range was a little bit better, but the actual throughput was worse. And
that's because it is using less spectrum. When you're in NSA, when you're in non-standalone, combining 4G and 5G on T-Mobile, you're typically using between 100 and 120 megahertz of spectrum total. If you're doing the standalone carrier aggregation, you're using 90. 90 is less than 110, 120. So there you go. But ultimately, first of all, you should still be getting good performance in both modes because 90 is still plenty of spectrum. The standalone should improve the range of the 2.5, which is, one of T-Mobile's great dramas, and it should have better latency. I don't know if it does quite yet, but the technological idea is it should have better latency.
Yeah, that you hit the nail on the head with the spectrum differences. As far as the latency goes, it wasn't there, and the throughput actually wasn't that comparable, to be honest. It was a good, solid 200 to 300 megabits per second difference, which I'd say.
Yeah, so that really does jibe with my experience that this carrier aggregation is still in kind of an engineering experimental mode.
Gotcha.
They're working on it, but it's not the kind of thing. It's not on the maps because they don't want people to start looking for it and think they're going to have a better experience yet.
Well, hey, since we're talking about other carriers, have you forgotten about Dish? Have they still been on your brain?
I mean, they bought a lot of spectrum in the Andromeda auction, didn't they?
They did. We heard one carrier dropped out. It turns out that was Verizon, but Dish was a strong player in there. Dish and AT&T.
Yeah, so Dish bought enough spectrum in Andromeda to provide a crappy but functional network nationwide.
I guess that's what they need, though, right?
Yeah, basically Dish could give Boost subscribers the lousy experience that Boost subscribers are accustomed to consistently on their own network now with the Andromeda spectrum. So mission accomplished, right?
So I'm going to take a wild guess and just say that you're not super optimistic on Dish's outlook to build a proper nationalized network.
I mean, the thing is, Dish has lied and betrayed their promises so many times over the years with this that, and every time I say this in public, like Peter Adderton or somebody like goes off on me, and they're like, well, the FCC will clearly fine them billions of dollars if they don't fulfill their promises. But I believe in Charlie Ergen's ability to evade any fine or punishment at any time.
It's a superpower, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Dish is very much, I will trust it when I can log on to it.
I feel the same way, but even if we took Charlie Ergen out the equation, I'm a firm believer that corporations will do the bare minimum to get the maximum amount of value. And if that just means barely covering people with 5 megahertz wide channels of whatever just to get the pop count, then that's what happens. But that being said, I do have an interesting question for you when it comes to Dish, and this actually plays into AT&T's 5G strategy because of the synergies. Do you think that Dish and AT&T make a strategic partnership that gives AT&T access to things like Dish's AWS and other assets that Dish has to both quickly meet the deployment requirements, but also to help out the AT&T network?
I don't know if the AT&T network needs that help. I think that with the 80 megahertz of C-band plus Andromeda that they have coming up, and then the additional hit of C-band in 2024, and AT&T's 4G network is less loaded and more resilient than either T-Mobile or Verizon. Like, AT&T has definitely been suffering less in terms of congestion issues on 4G. Than T-Mobile or Verizon.
They were happy to postpone C-band. Like, FAA, come in here, do whatever you want. We delay it next year for all AT&T cared. They were ready to, because they had a strong LTE network, and it turns out, as you mentioned, they're waiting for the equipment this summer. But Sascha,
yeah, so Dennis, like I can see your perspective, but I think this is a case where Dish may feel they need AT&T, but I don't necessarily know that AT&T feels they need Dish.
Fair. Well,
I actually wanted to circle back to the C-band, the original talk. So we talked about range, about the same as T-Mobile's ultra capacity network. Airports was the other question you set out to answer, Sascha. What did you find regarding the airport restrictions and where C-band was and was not available?
So the airport restrictions seem to be a very fast-moving topic. At the time I was out testing, I was told it was a 2-mile exclusion zone. Now, it sounds like today some news came out that they may be shrinking the exclusion zones. That said, when I went around looking at Verizon, I found about a 3.5-mile radius around the airport was excluded. So they were definitely being even more conservative than the FAA was allowing. But the question is, when I went to Verizon and I said, hey, this is much bigger than the 2 miles, they said, hey, it's only been a couple of days. We're turning on more towers every day. So in a couple of weeks, it might close in. But they were definitely starting out at a wider radius out from the airport than they had promised.
Sascha, do you know why certain airports weren't affected by this? Like, for example, the Pittsburgh International Airport out my way actually has really good C-band coverage. So I was just wondering if you knew why certain airports didn't have to deal with the exclusionary zones, or what exempted them to make them special.
Well, so the exclusion zones are around 50 airports was the deal that the carriers and the FAA made. And if you're not on the 50 airport list, you don't have an exclusion zone. But then the FAA said that if you don't have an exclusion zone, the FAA reserves the right to cancel flights in bad weather. So you may not have an exclusion zone, but that may mean that you are under more FAA capriciousness in terms of their ability to cancel flights.
Well, thankfully, I'm back from Colorado/Vegas, so I won't have to worry for a bit.
All right.
Well, and in Colorado, of course, there's no C-band at all because
I don't want to talk about it, Sascha.
Yeah, because Denver is where all of the satellite ground stations are.
So that's what's going on.
Yeah, so there's no C-band in D.C., Atlanta, Denver, or Honolulu. And the reasons are Atlanta and Denver are where the satellite ground stations for the continental U.S. are. And the satellite companies need more time to move all of those ground stations out of the band. So Denver and Atlanta are out because they're the centers of the satellite industry.
I mean, that does seem pretty important. All right, I'll give them that.
Honolulu, Hawaii is completely dependent on satellite for everything. So They're not, once more, they have like a complicated situation. They're not touching it. DC area, I think that's the military. I'm not sure. I think that's not private satellite, but it is a similar, like, satellite users need more time to move out of the band.
Got it. All right. And then I guess talking about the exclusion zones, that's kind of adjacent to coverage. Is Verizon's coverage map accurate? I think that's the big question.
Absolutely not.
How
Is
off
any
is
carriers?
That's a really good question. I mean, they're not like, I would say the 4G coverage maps are not that bad.
Hopefully they've had them out for many years at this point. They should be able to refine those.
Hold on,
You disagree?
I'm a big AT&T quote unquote fanboy on the show, and I know that AT&T's coverage map isn't that on point. And I can tell you too, T-Mobile's, ever since they removed like the little checkbox from Ookla, also not great. It looks like an intern just copy pasted some MS Paint and just decided that's the coverage map. And for Verizon, my testing with Verizon has been much shorter lived than my AT&T and T-Mobile testing, so not quite up to snuff. But I don't trust any carrier's actual coverage map. I use third-party stuff. I'll trust third-party stuff like Cell Mapper before I trust the native carrier's coverage map.
Fair enough. I'm not going to defend the carrier coverage maps. I mean, when the Verizon C-band coverage map has all of Brooklyn seamlessly covered with a perfect, uninterrupted blanket of C-band, and I can tell you that is absolutely not true.
Yeah, you did a great job outlining just not dead zones, but areas where C-band was not found in New York. Is that Google Maps? Like, I've always wondered how you make those maps. Like, they're perfect, they're custom, they're awesome. I love them in the articles.
So sometimes Google Maps is involved. Sometimes it's Tableau.
Okay.
Tableau can plot latitudes and longitudes onto Mapbox maps.
Whoa, that is awesome.
Yeah, so sometimes it's Google Maps, sometimes it's Tableau, and then this new Wind software that we're using generates its own maps sometimes. But I'm still getting a handle on the best forms of reporting coming out of that thing. It's really complicated.
Great transition here. Please tell the audience really quickly, what is the Wind software? Can you explain it to us like we're five?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so y'all are familiar with the kinds of consumer software that people use to test, to check out networks. You're familiar with Speed Test and OpenSignal and, Cell Mapper and all that. But there's another level of that kind of software which is used by the carriers themselves and by people in the infrastructure industry to really debug the actual networks as they're building them. And Wind is that kind of software. It was made by a company called Solutelia that Ookla bought last year. And Ookla has been folding it into their portfolio, the same way they're doing with Root Metrics, which they also bought. And because Ookla wants to offer this sort of complete soup to nuts answer for every level of network testing and management. So when a Verizon driver goes out there, I don't know if it's Verizon. Like, I don't know who Wind's customers are because that's all like proprietary corporate stuff, but I'm assuming Verizon. But like when a Verizon driver goes out there and they're trying to figure out, oh, this cell isn't handing off to this other cell. Wind is the kind of software they're using on handhelds to get the really low-level network data they need to be able to troubleshoot that. And I need like 10% of the data that these guys are using.
So, like, can you give an example for your use case what Wind software is allowing you to do that you couldn't otherwise have done before with, like, normal Samsung service mode and, like, the consumer stuff that's out there?
Wind lets me see exactly how much data is being transferred per channel.
Whoa.
So yeah, so you can see first of all not only what channels you're using, but how saturated each channel is and how much each channel is being used. I can run an Ookla test, and I can see that Ookla test broken down by, well, there's this much on band 66 and this much on band 2 and this much on N77. It also lets me set up really complicated test scenarios. I can do voice calling now. I can do text sending. There's a YouTube plugin where you can do like reliability and quality of streamed YouTube videos, and it tracks the codec it's using to make sure it doesn't like class you down on the YouTube videos. There's a lot of so that's
Stetson,
some examples.
I promise I'll let you go because I could see you're chopping at the bit, but just let me ask 2 quick questions before you go into yours. One, when it comes to the Win software, how come we don't ever see anybody ever actually doing videos on it? Is there some type of like NDA that prevents you from showing this information to people? Because like I never see anything actually reported saying like, oh yeah, when I ran this test, it was this level of detail. Like, is there?
I think right now I'm the only person who is not a corporate customer who's using it.
Gotcha. And then secondary question. I know this is directed towards like enterprises, right? But hypothetically speaking, let's just say me and Stetson wanted to try to get our hands on this delicious software that's so powerful. Like, what exactly was the process for getting like access? Like, who do you call? Who do you email? Like,
so that's where like the dark secret has to come out, which is that PCMag and Ookla have the same parent company.
Well played, Sasha.
So
Well
it
played.
is an internal situation for us.
gotcha.
Where we work closely with Ookla in ways that, and at levels that maybe other organizations might not be able to, because we actually have the same parent company. And like they can't read my results. Like there's an editorial wall in between, but it does enable a level of cooperation that might not happen otherwise.
Understood. Go ahead, Stetson.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say this is so freaking cool, Sasha. Like the data you're able to get, the maps you're plotting, where you're connecting, and this explains how you immediately knew when you were testing out T-Mobile's 5G carrier aggregation. Oh, like this is more of a test site because it's not sending data over, what was it, like band
71.
Yeah,
Yep.
band 71.
Yep.
So yeah, that is outstanding. Yeah, as Dennis said, we're chomping at the bit to email the right person over there so we can see if we can get our hands on it.
Or
we'll make
even
an enterprise. We'll become a customer.
Or even if you're allowed to, like, maybe it's not on PC Mag, but like, Sasha, if you just made like your own little personal YouTube channel was like, hey, this is like the transmit speed on this carrier, and this is the way like that T-Mobile's allocating speeds over the different bands versus how Verizon does it. Like, I personally, and I feel like a lot of our audience who's also very techie would be very much into seeing these differences, because I think it would basically highlight just the stark differences in network management practices from the carriers.
Yeah, there's some people we could loop in, we could get in touch with. But let's talk after the podcast. I'm getting some ideas.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So I think the big question here, Sasha, how will you leverage the Win software to make the PCMag fastest mobile networks test 2022 the best test it's ever been?
There's 2 big things involved. Number 1, we can do voice calling now. And yes, that is an ancient feature. It is the oldest feature. It is the original feature. And we haven't been able to do it up until now. And so we are going to have voice drop rates, and that is going to excite a lot of people. And that is going to put us on parity with Root. And does OpenSignal do voice? They don't, right?
Open Signal's report, when we were looking at it, seemed to be a lot of like,
I don't think they do, actually.
feel.
I think it's only Root that does voice.
Yeah. Open Signal did more like game testing, but they did it based off like perception. We had some critiques, or I had some critiques. I don't know if Stetson agreed with me on them, but I had some critiques with how
they have voice app experience, Sasha, and that is using a voice over IP situation to test out
Skype,
the quality.
WhatsApp, that kind of thing.
You're not doing what you're going to be doing, which it sounds like is actually placing a test voice call.
Actually placing 30-second voice calls every 3 minutes. It's
Oh, boy.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Yes. So we're going to be able to do that. And I'm thinking of including a video stream consistency measure. Which
Okay.
Oddly, we were able to do like years and years ago because we were using a different set of software from a company called Sensorly that had that.
Oh, yeah, essentially. All right.
Yeah. Sensorly had a streaming measure. Then we switched to Speed Test, which didn't. Speed Test does now. They just introduced that last year, but Wind also has it. So now we've got voice calls, we've got streaming, and then also, of course, we're going to be able to slice things up band by band, and hopefully be able to say, hey, here's where C-band really is as we crisscross the country with our 10,000 miles of driving.
So when you do the video test, I'm not sure how much you're allowed to talk about it, but when you do the video test, how are you going to plan accordingly for some of the plan limits, like, say, Verizon still limiting 720p video on LT, for example?
I mean, if Verizon is throttling video to a certain level on all consumer plans, then what we're testing is whether or not the stream drops.
Got you.
That makes sense.
So it's whether or not the stream drops at whatever the native quality is that the carrier is willing to give you.
Understood. I phrased that question poorly because I know you guys have custom plans and I didn't know how to differentiate it from the consumer plans. That's why I was...
the only thing that's really custom about our plans is that they never deprioritize.
Understood.
Yeah, and they won't flag the network for basically spamming it and looking was like a DDoS attack.
Yeah, we do stuff that looks like abuse to
I'm sure they love
the systems, and so they have to flag them.
Oh, there goes
Sascha.
the team at PC Mag again.
Sascha, I do gotta ask you though. I'm sure you had your fingers on the pulse of this, but the awards that have been coming out recently with the different reports from OpenSignal, from RootMetrics, and so forth. What were your thoughts? Were you surprised at all by the results, or were you just like, yeah, T-Mobile had that in the bag for the...
I mean, T-Mobile has 2022 right now. You know, T-Mobile had 2021. T-Mobile has 2022. It really is it's all about cementing the importance of mid-band and the fact that right now, hang on, somebody's calling me. Oh, all good. I'm not going to take that. Okay, right now, T-Mobile has mid-band. Nobody else really has mid-band. Mid-band is where it's at. That is why Verizon and AT&T are racing to catch up.
So my question then, who do you think will win the PC Mag Fastest Mobile Networks Test 2022? If you were to make a prediction right now, who is the winner in your book at the moment?
I hate predicting that because there is always a large chance I will be wrong.
Oh, yeah, it's like 66%. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll say that right now.
Who are you rooting for, maybe? How about that?
I don't root. Hey.
Okay, all right,
okay.
Right.
I neither root for a carrier, nor do I'm trying to make this into a RootMetrics joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, I need to stay, trust me, I need to stay completely neutral through this.
Yeah.
The carriers are really intense personalities.
Okay. What?
And if you appear to be on anyone's side, everybody else gets really angry. You got to stay straight in the middle, and that's the only way you can get an honest answer.
All right.
Well, I do gotta bring up something on my personal end. I personally was very surprised by the results. Not necessarily the speed results. Like, that's not necessarily what like threw me for a loop. Like, I figured T-Mobile's average speeds, would probably be on the grand scope of things a lot faster because of N41 and everything like that, right? But what surprised me specifically with OpenSignal is like these different metrics that they were using to test to figure out the speeds. Like with OpenSignal's report when we were looking at it, Stetson, you remember, they were including like 3G data in with LTE with 5G, with totally like misskewed results. Like it made it really weird. And so with that in mind, like I found the testing to be flawing. I had a personal critique with that, which made me question the authenticity of like T-Mobile actually winning some of the cities.
So in the tester world, for years, there's always been the dream of application-based testing, because starting like 4 or 5 years ago, the raw data speeds you get have been less important than, does my Instagram upload work? Can I stream Spotify consistently? Am I getting YouTube in 1080p? It's much more about when you bring it home to people, you want to bring it home with those applications. So I see OpenSignal trying to get there, but I do fear that that those measures they're using for things like gaming and streaming are actually super synthetic. Like, are they actually running games? I don't think they are. I think they're using speed numbers and just permuting them in a way that tells a gaming story.
Well, no, my bigger problem with that is they were playing the games, but they were basing it off of people's feel. Was it good enough for me to play my game? And I really dislike that. Like, when I look at a test, okay, I want it to be repeatable. And my big problem is I'm from Pittsburgh. Like, I literally live, sleep, breathe, test Pittsburgh every day. And the fact that Open Signal decided, and I drive around PA. Open Signal said all of Pennsylvania was a T-Mobile region. I can tell you right now, and I will die on this hill, if I'm wrong, I don't care. T-Mobile is not a PA state. Maybe on Philadelphia. Philadelphia, it's a little bit better. But out here, no. They lack coverage. They lack performance. They've been removing cell sites that were old Sprint sites that were giving coverage in places where they didn't have native coverage before. Like, this city of Pittsburgh is an AT&T city, and maybe just recently because of C-band has become a Verizon city. But T-Mobile was not in the equation. And I'm not sure if you've ever been out to Pittsburgh, Sascha, but
I've always wanted to.
Well, I highly encourage it. There's places where T-Mobile has good sites, Bethel Park being one of them. That's one of their, we'll call it that, their flagship site, where it gets like 800 meg by like 100 and great pings and everything. But then they have a lot of other sites where, even though there's N41 on it, because of the backhaul constraints that we talked about, and because of other issues, performance just is not there. So I took a little bit of a shock because they couldn't back up how they got those results. Like, it would make sense if they said, oh, we tested 8 places around here that we knew T-Mobile was good. Okay, that makes sense. But it felt like it was better, and they didn't report ping times or anything. Like, what? Like, I don't know. Anyway, sorry, side tangent, spicy rants, sometimes disorganized. Stetson, you have a question. I can tell it on your face.
Yeah, I guess I had 2 questions. One, it sounded like for the Win software, you were given special phones. Is that right? Like, how did that work?
So to get that low-level modem access, and a lot of people in the tester community know this, that to get low-level modem access, even on Android, you have to root your phones.
Yeah.
And so the phones, and because we are operating at this corporate level, the phones have to be rooted, and then they basically have to be approved and verified by the Wind people. So they're rooted phones with special firmware.
So you're getting special phone. Wow, so cool. So special testing phones from Wind. Oh man. And I think, this is a slight tangent, but I think back to the coverage issue, we just got to talk to our friends over at Root Metrics and see, like, they will know. They will have the most data, I would think, on where C-band actually is deployed. So hopefully they can get like a coverage map or something out there. I think that'd be really cool.
I love Root Metrics' app too. I really hope that they actually add some of the functionality now that they've been bought by Ookla.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in seeing how that merger is going to happen, because Root does have a bunch of functionalities for the enthusiast that Ookla typically hasn't really paid attention to. And so are they going to fold that in? I mean, I know I've felt that what Ookla really wanted Root for is its consulting side.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. That Root's an iceberg. You see their Root score reports and their consumer app.
Yes.
But that's just a little bit iceberg above the water. And what's mostly under the water is that they are third-party consultants and testers working for businesses, municipalities, and carriers as they build out and verify networks.
You know, Sascha, you just gave me a thought, circling back to something I forgot to ask. With all this information that carriers have access to through the Wind software tool and, all the things that Ookla is able to bring to the table, why, and including internal maps, why do we see coverage maps being so inaccurate in the U.S. from the carriers with all this information?
The coverage maps aren't based on actual coverage. They're
Wait,
mathematical projections
what?
based
That's
on
like
tower
the
locations.
That's the quote of the podcast. Coverage maps aren't based on actual coverage.
I mean, except for that period when T-Mobile was using Ookla data.
Oh, is that where they got the verified
Yeah.
check marks?
Yeah.
That's genius. They should have kept doing that.
Yeah.
Wow.
But what I'm getting at is like, why would the carriers like? So they know this method of doing things is wrong, right? And they know they can offer a better coverage map, relatively speaking, easily without any cost to them, just based off the fact that every one of their people have a phone that they can pull information from. They can literally have it pre-installed in the firmware of the software for the Android phones to collect that data. Like, I don't understand why the carriers would want to put out a less accurate map, especially when they're starting to get into this idea of fixed wireless, where you have to have a good mid-band signal if you want to offer that product reliably without having like unnecessary calls going into your customer service center. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know either, given that as we've just covered, T-Mobile put Ookla data on their map and
Brilliant.
had that verified data. Like when you when you look on a carrier map, okay, the easiest way to see this situation is you look on a carrier map, and if you go to Cell Mapper and you find out where a tower is, and you find a relatively isolated tower, and you go to that tower on the carrier's map, you'll see it's very much a like certain shape of blob around the tower. And that's because what you're seeing on the map is just a mathematical projection based on terrain data frequency and power output. So it's just a mathematical projection, as opposed to that Ookla data on the T-Mobile map, which was real coverage.
It was so awesome. It was so awesome.
So no, I don't know why. This is turning into me marketing Ookla for 42 minutes, and I'm sure those guys will be glad. But I don't know why why all the carriers didn't make a deal with them for that.
Yeah, that is, I would guess time and money. It's probably more time efficient and cost effective to just run these mathematical numbers, pump them out. And you want to portray there's coverage there, and there's no like reasonable doubt, I guess, that you don't have coverage because the math checks out or whatever.
Well, time and money, the reason why I brought up the call center thing is that every time a phone call happens, I want to say it charges the carrier like $1.50 or something per phone call taken. Like, it's something... It sounds cheap, but then you remember all the calls that are coming in. If you could save, if 3 out of 10 customers are calling because their cell coverage isn't working, and you could save that just by having a more accurate coverage map, like, to me that makes sense, and it gets you in the good graces of the FCC or whomever whenever they do the next government subsidized funding for deploying X, Y, and Z in these zip codes.
But I think also there's a whole left-hand, right-hand thing involved. Like, how big is Verizon as an organization? Do you know if those test drivers and the marketing department have any interaction at all? Like, the departments and the lines of reporting in these companies, especially now that we're down to 3 mega carriers, they're so huge, and the amount of just administrative overhead in these companies is so huge that like something which seems simple and efficient and would be simple and efficient if it was just like 3 guys around a table doing things, might not be if it's a 75,000 person company.
You're right, but then I think about what T-Mobile did, where they already had it deployed and decided to conscientiously pull it away. So, I mean, that, and plus also, if we're thinking about this rationally, like, I'm willing to bet good money that like the coverage map, because you talked about the mathematical equation, right? I guarantee that's probably automated. Like, literally, engineer goes to site. If site goes up, boom, it's there. Like, it just updates. But I'm also willing to bet too, just as easily, you can automate Ookla's like little check marks on there like that, and just have it doing that thing with some. Ookla probably has an API already made for the carriers just to go plug and play in the same way that they use Google Maps.
Ookla's probably ready to sell. Like, they have the product ready to go. They could sell it, right? They want to make money.
I mean, it'd be advantageous for both of them, though. Like, could you imagine if Ookla worked out a deal with Verizon that said, hey, our app will be pre-installed on every single Android phone that can't be disabled or uninstalled so you can collect your data? Like, that'd be so great for Ookla. Extra ad bucks all day, any day.
Yeah, and we don't have to. We don't like. I enjoy us being totally in Ookla's pocket for this, but we don't have to be. They could make the deal with OpenSignal. They could make the deal with Cell Mapper. There's a whole world of these apps doing crowdsourced coverage that the carriers could work with that they have decided just to do these mathematical models instead. Because, I mean, what we're all circling around is the simple fact the mathematically modeled maps look better.
It's true.
They
It's
look
true
like
fact.
more coverage.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I had one final question. When Verizon rolled out C-band, they did one other thing. They introduced new plans, they changed the names, they changed some other things. One big change I noticed, and I think you also had an article on it, was with the hotspot data and how it performed on millimeter wave or 5G ultra wideband. It went from being truly unlimited high-speed hotspot data to now being capped at 3 megabits per second. What did you think of the change, and why do you think that happened?
I mean, it's not capped at 3 megabits per second automatically.
After the high-speed allotment. I should clarify
after the high-speed allotment. Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. Millimeter wave has so much has so much headroom still that there's no reason to cut this down, and the only reason to cut this down is that if there's a billing flag in Verizon systems that can't differentiate between millimeter wave and C-band because they're both ultra wideband.
Yeah.
And so because they can't offer unlimited hotspot on C-band because there isn't enough spectrum. They only have 60 megahertz. So if their systems can no longer differentiate between C-band and millimeter wave, then they have to fall down to the lowest common denominator. But it's dumb for their systems to not be able to differentiate between C-band and millimeter wave. They might be the same little UW icon, but they're totally different technologies with totally different capabilities. So... so I do think this is a bad move of Verizon's. They've got the room on millimeter wave to let people do whatever they want, and they should really be continuing to let people take advantage of it.
I don't think it's a...
I think it was to promote their 5G home internet product. I think that's really what it was for.
So, yes and no. I mean, they're not so... They did say they're making 5G home internet available more widely, but the 5G home internet availability does not exactly map still to the millimeter wave availability.
This is true.
Millimeter wave is still available in places and to people they're not offering 5G home internet to. So until, basically, I would totally be with you and agree if anyone in millimeter wave coverage could get 5G home internet, but they can't.
Verizon, it's just a question mark.
So I don't think it's a billing issue because you could have it all show UW and then have different bill codes in the system to differentiate things. And I partially agree with the 5G home internet statement, but I think the bigger issue is that Verizon probably noticed that there was people that were abusing it and like abusing that millimeter wave, even though it wasn't that big a deal, right? But they probably noticed that people were abusing it or people were trying to use their phones as home internet replacements instead of getting the home internet product in those dedicated specific areas. And they were probably trying to be like foresighting ahead and trying to stop that from happening. As well as the fact, too, that when you have everything being listed as UW, it gets a little bit complicated to the end consumer between when they're on C-band and when they're on millimeter wave. I mean, obviously, for someone like me and you, it's really easy to tell just by running a speed test. But to the end consumer, it probably got complicated. I think these combinations of factors is what ended up making Verizon do it. Do I like that they did it? Sorry.
I think you're right. I think part of what is underlying my particular tone is that I think they've been way too conservative in terms of making home internet available in places with millimeter wave coverage. I think that Verizon CTO told me years ago, she said, where we have millimeter wave, we're going to have home internet. It's the same network. And they did not do that.
Well, maybe if they had accurate coverage maps, we wouldn't have this problem.
You know, it's funny that you say that Verizon's conservative, because I'd also like to say that I think Verizon's being super conservative on their C-band performance. If I remember correctly, I think they said 100 meg to expect 100 meg on it. Mm-hmm. And from my testing, I don't know if you would agree, but it seems to be averaging somewhere around 500 meg on the down and about 50 meg on the up. That seems to be the average sweet spot for what I've been noticing.
I got very different performance at the different cell sites I tried. In Queens, it was more like 100, 150 meg. In Brooklyn, it was way up at 400, 500 megs. So, but I think they're projecting forward to a loaded network. And as you said, they're super conservative. They quoted LTE speeds as 5 to 12 megabits per second for years. Even when LTE was like way past that, they were still saying expect 5 to 12 megabits per second. They're just the kind of company that would, like, it's nice that they would rather underpromise and overdeliver. That's great. We want companies to underpromise and overdeliver.
I agree. I mean, that's good. I just, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's good to underpromise and overdeliver, but I also, at the same time, kind of wish that their little bar was set higher, because, like, I feel like when you set the bar really low for, like, this is the minimum to expect, then at some point you get, like, the underachievement sort of thing happening here. Like, sometimes it's good to have a maybe a bigger range. Maybe it's when it's a little bit more accurate. It says between 100 and 500, more something like that, versus like expect only like 100 megs to like 150. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think they also don't want to lose other customers to T-Mobile right now. I mean, fortunately, there's a lot of competition in the network space at the moment.
It's been great. Sascha, did you have special like locations in mind when you went out to test? Like, do you go on CellMapper, like find a tower site and, hey, I'm going to go there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, CellMapper is absolutely key.
It's amazing.
Yeah, because you've got to find, I mean, otherwise you are literally just like walking around the streets like this, trying to look on rooftops for things.
Yeah.
So CellMapper is super important when you're going out testing. And of course, not every panel is on CellMapper. So sometimes you can still be surprised. But it's definitely a base. I'll go on and I'll find different sites in different neighborhoods and then go to them and then just start walking away from them and see what that radius is or whether they work or that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So the big issue I've had with CellMapper, though, is I've noticed that 5G doesn't seem to be mapped out or be mapping out properly, with the exception like N71 barely for T-Mobile. I was just wondering if you knew anything about that. I don't know if you know the guys at CellMapper.
Yeah, no, I really need to get to know them, considering how much I use their product. No, they really don't have good 5G metrics on there, and we're just lucky that so far the carriers have almost always put up 5G on existing 4G sites. But as soon as there's new 5G sites, for instance, I'm pretty sure the AT&T site we used in Chicago is not on CellMapper.
Interesting.
So
maybe,
I was going to say, just ping the Ookla guys. They seem to be in a shopping mode. You can just buy them up.
Yeah. but yeah, yeah. So 5G is definitely an issue with CellMapper.
Sweet. Well, Sascha, it's been a pleasure having you on. We'd like to end the show, as always, with what plan are you using and what phone do you have?
So I am a T-Mobile Magenta Max subscriber. I've got 3 lines of Magenta Max at my home, and our family are very, very satisfied with that. T-Mobile performance here in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York City is excellent, and I have very good 80 megahertz of N41. So there's no problems with that. I'm still carrying around a Galaxy S21 Ultra at the moment. I would consider myself to be between phones. I really want to see that S22 coming on February 9th, see what it brings to the table. That's going to be our first phone in the US with a Qualcomm X65 modem, and I've always got to be on the latest modem.
Yeah.
Sascha, real quick question as well. Are you still using the T-Mobile home internet, and do you plan to try out the new gear?
So no, I canceled the T-Mobile home internet. It turned out that for personal use, it was less reliable than the Verizon Fios that I also have access to. I mean, it's not that fair a comparison. If you're gonna if you have fiber, get fiber. T-Mobile home internet is for all those people who can't get fiber. So I was trying it out to review it, but ultimately, I fell back to fiber.
Makes sense. Yeah, well, Sascha, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to let the audience know, like maybe where they can sign up for your 5G newsletter that comes out every Friday or things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a newsletter called Sascha Segan's Race to 5G. It contains a story and some roundups of other interesting things I found. Comes out every Friday. And if you Google PC Mag Race to 5G, you'll get the sign-up page for our newsletters. And otherwise, I'm working on some big features that I can't quite talk about yet. So stay tuned, and throughout the spring and summer, there's going to be some great stuff on PCMag.com.
I love it. Sascha, thank you so much, and everything you can find linked in the video description. All right, thank you. Take care.
Peace.